It's Monday, February 3rd, in the year 2025, also known as the smartest year ever. My name's Gordy. Today we're talking about the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. The time a wave of molasses, taller than a two-story building, tore through Boston like a sticky tsunami. I remember this from hearing about it as a kid a lot more than I did from living in Boston for almost 2 decades. To be honest, I kind of forgot about it when I lived in Boston. But I just remember it being fascinating to me ever since I heard about it. I think my dad told me about it when I was a kid. And the rumor that was really fascinating was the idea that you could still smell the molasses on the street years later. And I lived in Boston, like I said, for many years, and very close to the scene of this event that I'm talking about today. I never smelled it, but never really heard a lot of people talk about it. I'm sure there's like a plaque or something, but I didn't even see it. And I used to always run right by this location where this happened. So I don't know. Maybe people have just moved on. But in my research today, I did read that in the 1940s and 50s, people in the Navy Yard, Charlestown Navy Yard in Boston, that's actually where I used to live, you could smell it in the air being wafted over from the North End where today's topic took place, in the North End of Boston. It kind of sounds silly, big molasses flood, but it's actually pretty horrendous. And it really goes to show you how history, or just tragedy, I guess, can turn into entertainment if there's enough time separation, or maybe if it's unconventional enough. But let's get right into it. Imagine standing on a street corner in Boston when, out of nowhere, you hear a massive explosion. You turn your head, and you see a 25-foot wave of molasses is barreling towards you. It's crushing buildings, sweeping people off their feet, and it smells like pancakes and death. That wasn't a fever dream. It happened, and it was one of the most bizarre disasters in American history. On January 15th, 1919, at 12:40 p.m., an enormous molasses storage tank in Boston's North End exploded, releasing 2.3 million gallons of thick, sugary syrup into the streets. The wave moved at 35 miles per hour and flattened everything in its path. That's faster than any human can run, especially in their little 1919 shoes on those little 1919 Boston cobblestone rocky streets. 21 people died, 150 were injured, and entire buildings were ripped from their foundations. The Boston Post described the horror. Molasses, waist deep, covered the street and swirled and bubbled about the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being, it was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in a sticky mass, showed where any life was. Horses died like many flies on sticky flypaper. The more they struggled, the deeper in the mess they were ensnared. Human beings, men and women, suffered likewise. Yikes. So what went wrong? The United States Industrial Alcohol Company, the USIA, built the 50-foot tall steel tank in 1915 and rushed it into service without all the proper safety testing. From the moment it was filled, it actually leaked pretty badly, so much so that apparently the locals would actually collect free molasses from the dripping seams. Instead of fixing it, the USIA apparently painted it brown to hide the leaks. It was just reminds me of the myth, or I don't know if it's a myth, but it might be, of the British soldiers wearing red so you couldn't see them bleeding. And I think the joke was that the French military wore brown, but I don't think either one of those is true. That's mean. That was a 2004 joke. But yeah, that should tell you all you need to know about the engineering priorities of the USIA and how they built their steel tanks. They're painting over the seams that were leaking. But then came the perfect storm. Boston had been freezing for days, but on January 15th, temperatures jumped from 2 degrees Fahrenheit to 40 degrees in just hours. The molasses inside fermented, built up gas pressure, and boom. Witnesses described hearing a roar like a machine gun, followed by the ground shaking with this deep rumbling like a freight train. The wave of molasses, 25 feet high and 165 feet wide, ripped through Boston streets, crushing buildings, flipping streetcars, and carrying people and horses like Dunkin' cups floating in the Charles. One man was swept off his feet and thrown into Boston Harbor. A firefighter was blasted out of his station by the sheer force of the explosion. And rescuers struggled to reach survivors because the molasses hardened like concrete in the winter air. Yikes, that is not a good scene right there. Yeah, I remember I was reading some articles from the time, and it was reported that everything that a Bostonian touched was sticky, which it still is on the T on the subway there. Yeah. This happened in what is now Langone Park. I don't even know if that's how you say it. I can't say half the words in Massachusetts, and they don't even know how to say most of them. But I used to run by there all the time, and it just smelled like cars. Or like when you're lucky in that area in the north, and you could smell the Italian food and all that good stuff. But I never smelled molasses. Never smelled molasses. Very close to where the Celtics play, by the way, to put it in perspective. Yeah. The disaster led to one of the first major class action lawsuits in U.S. history. The 5-year investigation found the USIA fully responsible. It turns out their tank was built with steel that was thinner than a dime. And never properly reinforced. In the end, the company paid out today's equivalent of $12 million in damages and helped establish modern building codes. And the company, I was reading, blamed anarchists. They were like, anarchists must have done this. Something related to the alcohol industry, perhaps, and how this molasses was likely going into the creation of alcohol. I mean, obviously, because it's the United States Industrial Alcohol Company is who's building it. For decades afterwards, locals swore that on hot days you could smell the molasses in the air, and I remember hearing that. But you can't. You can't. At least I couldn't. It doesn't really make sense that it would at this point. Everything's been replaced, from probably the plumbing to the buildings to the sod to the whole area. Doesn't smell anymore, but I think it's kind of cool. I think it's good just to tell kids, get them interested in history, maybe. I don't know, to a certain degree. But there you have it. They say slow and steady wins the race, but in 1919, molasses was neither, and it still won. Thanks to all my sources, which can be found in the YouTube description. Please follow, rate, like, subscribe, share with your friends. Please share, tell people, comment on my socials. Drop a comment on my YouTube at Smartest Year Ever. Also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for the full episodes. At Smartest Year Ever on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts for your daily clips. Add, some multimedia in with those. Add some images. Spend a lot of time with those. I really like these and would love for these to be my primary, but right now I got to give the people what they want. So thanks for listening to this long form one. In the meantime, stay curious, stay clever on our quest to become the world's greatest conversationalists. I will see you tomorrow in the Smartest Year Ever.